I can now introduce our next speaker. So we've heard, I think it was Anna saying, we have the science to regulate. But there has already been some regulation in the field of food contact materials. But before we move into this regulation sphere, it would be interesting to hear from a consumer perspective. What has changed in Europe over the last 10 years? So it's my pleasure to introduce Pelle Moos. He is Senior Policy Advisor at BEUC, the European Consumer Organization. So please welcome Pelle.
Very well pronounced, by the way, for BEUC. Very well pronounced for BEUC.
You see, I practice my Danish a lot.
Yes, well, I mean, it's a French acronym. It's not my name. That's fine, but it's the acronym.
On the French side.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I'm half French, yeah. So I cheat.
Well, it is also a matter of consumer choice, we say, how you want to pronounce it. So I hope you all hear me, and I then just need to find my balance. I'm not used to being free on the stage. So thank you very much for having me, Jane. Again, I'm very happy to be back. Last time I was at your workshop was in 2018, I think, maybe 19. Either way, happy to be back. Also very happy to be able to say that what I will be presenting today is not the same as I presented in 19, because things have in fact changed. It's not to pick up on what Pete said before, it's not quite the paradigm shift that we would like to see, but there has been a lot of rock throwing, including by myself, against the established way of thinking food contact material regulation. And I think it's also fair to say that as a result there has been a change, there has been a before and after in the last 10 years. I'll get to that. I will start with two things that have not changed in the last 10 years. The first is that I still remember to tie a tie, which was relieved this morning after 3 years sitting behind a screen, never wearing a suit. The other thing that has not changed is that BEUC is still proud of its members. We are now 42 national consumer organizations we are actually 46 national consumer organizations in 32 European countries. And BEUC is the Brussels-based umbrella organization representing their interests towards the EU institutions while also defending the interests of all European consumers, including in relation to food packaging policy, which is one of my main charges. Then moving on to what has actually changed, which is my next slide. Because now, compared to, I had it also with me in 2019, it now has a new endpoint, which is 2020. So this serves as a reminder, the slide, of the road we have traveled in the last 10 years, starting in 2012, where the then European Commission Department of Food Safety and Consumers, it doesn't exist anymore, it has been split, but DG Sanko put out a roadmap, a plan for regulating what is known as non-harmonized food contact materials, so essentially everything that's not plastic, under the heading materials on the market are not safe. That was the problem identification already 10 years ago. You cannot find that roadmap anywhere anymore. I have a copy, so if you're interested I can share it with you just to see where already 10 years ago we were in terms of the problem analysis, and then sadly, how little changed between then and now in terms of official policy. But I will get to the change. Because then in the meantime, we also got the European Parliament in 2016 picking up on the issue, issuing a very thorough, very strongly worded report on the issue related to chemicals in food contact materials. I think Jane was also involved in helping Parliament with that report, and it's really an excellent report, so I would strongly recommend reading it to anyone who's interested. And then the year after, we also got a report from the Joint Research Center, the Commission's Joint Research Center, looking into the market for food contact materials finding that in the absence of EU regulation, national member states of the European Union are developing their own rules, and the result is a patchwork of different rules, resulting in compliance problems across the EU and market barriers. That then finally, and it's not on the slide, but it led in November 2017 to the launch of an official review. I will get back to that because it sort of messes up the chronology a bit, because the results only came out after 2020, when we got what is known as the Farm to Fork strategy. So it's a Commission strategy outlining the policy, the strategy for EU food systems, which included a commitment and acknowledgement of the problems with the European legislation in this area, and a commitment to actually reform it. So quite a significant development, considering where we were and all the frustrations and all the rocks we were throwing without really having anything to show for it. So we did get that commitment, and it's a significant commitment, because not only is it ambitious, it's also the first time in 40 years the Commission sets a vision. Where are we heading with EU food packaging policy? And it outlines or identifies in the Farm to Fork strategy, you can access it with the QR link in the bottom, 3 objectives for what a reformed food packaging system should achieve. It should improve food safety and public health in particular, and that is important by reducing the use of hazardous chemicals, which is a new way of thinking compared to the old system. It should support the use of innovative and sustainable packaging solutions using environmentally friendly, reusable and recyclable materials. That is to be discussed, I think. And then finally, it should also contribute to food waste reduction. So as I already said, this is significant because it marks a break from where we were. And I want to take a step back just to highlight how significant this commitment is by showing where we were just 5 years before. That's around the time I started working on food packaging, which was in 2015. We had at the time a new better regulation agenda coming out from the then Juncker Commission, as it was known, which had a very, very strong focus on deregulation and promoting businesses. It was in the wake of the financial crisis, so it was all about a jobs and growth agenda. At the same time, we also had the discussions and negotiations over the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, that you may remember. It's dead in the meantime. But the idea was there also to try and seek alignment between EU and US regulatory policy, which was not going to be an upwards alignment, but rather a downwards alignment. So all this led us to do an assessment in, I think it was 18, of how the Juncker Commission was performing across our entire portfolio. And of course, as consumer organizations, we cover a lot of different topics, be it food packaging, but also digital aspects, consumer law, consumer rights, digital rights. And across all our topics, chemicals were the one area where the Commission was doing the worst. In fact, we went and we saw people in the Commission presented this slide to them, and they said, you could have used a darker color, maybe black, instead of purple. So it was really a sea change. And how did that happen? Well, we already heard parts of the story. Martin shared with the evidence coming out. I think the Food Packaging Forum has done an amazing work in this area. We also have the scientists, of course, that have contributed their work. Our members have also contributed testing of products that are on the market. So, for example, last year they investigated alternatives to single-use plastics. There was a ban in Europe of single-use plastics coming into effect last year, meaning alternatives are being marketed made of, for example, palm leaves or molded fiber or paper. And what they found was that, well, no surprise, since there's no regulation in place for these products, essentially half of them contain chemicals of concern, including PFAS chemicals, including pesticides that are banned in Europe, but then still being used in the countries where these materials originate. and other chemicals of concern, including concern for cancer. So that, of course, have helped produce the evidence base showing that there is an issue with the European regulations as it is. At the same time, it has also helped to show and feed citizens' concerns about the issues. There has been a lot of surveys coming out. For example, our Swedish member found in 2019 that 9 in 10 Swedes are concerned about chemicals in their everyday life and the impact it has on their health and the health of their children. And similar surveys have come out covering all of Europe, finding that, for example, 4 in 5 Europeans are concerned about chemicals in everyday products. We are launching today, actually, another survey, and we hope to have the results. This will be a survey specifically on food contact materials, and it should come out in February next year, just a little pre-advertisement. And then in parallel, and maybe probably even more important, we also had then a change in the political landscape in Europe. We had in 2019 elections, which was marked by a green wave, with the Green Party winning more seats than ever in the European Parliament, and a new commission coming in, giving up on the whole jobs and growth agenda of the previous commission, and instead having as their flagship initiative the formulation of a European Green Deal, which was published also in 2019, which sets out a roadmap for greening the EU economy to make it more sustainable, or to make it sustainable. So really a new growth paradigm, they call it. Whether it's then good to have a growth paradigm in these days, I don't know. And then just to close that slide, we also had, and that has flown a bit under the radar, the review I mentioned before. It was launched in 2017. The results came out earlier this year. The Commission has been very quiet with it. It's not easy to find. You can find it if you use the QR code in the bottom. Which is significant because it's the first time in 42 years EU legislation in this area has been reviewed. It confirms a lot of the problems that I think people in this room already knew were there. Adds new problems also that have not really been documented previously in terms of the problems for industry of complying with the safety requirements of the legislation, or enforcement also, again, was known, but here we then have much more systematic data in terms of the rules that are in place are not being enforced, meaning what is actually on the market is a bit of anyone's guess and anyone's concern, I think, also. So what's next then? The Commission has been somewhat quiet since 2020, unfortunately. But what has come out, and as probably many of you know, is that next week, 2 years ago, the Commission published the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, which sets the direction of travel for the reform of EU food packaging legislation, for example, in terms of phasing out the most, or what is identified as the most harmful chemicals, which includes endocrine disruptors, but also CMR substances, so substances that are carcinogenic, mutagenic, and toxic to reproduction. In parallel, or a bit again under the radar, I think the Commission likes to operate under the radar, they also put out a set of initial policy options which not only picks up on the chemical strategy and the commitments that are there, but also identifies more specific policy options for what could be done with the framework regulation we have in place in Europe. That came out in December 2020, as I recall. It's linked in the bottom. And part of the thinking there, which is quite significant, it shows it's not a paradigm shift yet, but it is an outline of a different way of regulating food contact materials, is that the Commission considers thinking of shifting the focus from the starting substances that goes into producing, for example, your plastic cup, to looking at what is actually migrating. So a bit what Martin was showing previously in terms of the overlapping circles where we have chemicals migrating that we are not necessarily those that were used to produce the item, but that is what the consumer in the end is being exposed to, and of course what we need to make sure that those chemicals, those mixtures are safe. Then The idea is also to prioritize better, to really, as I said before, look at the endocrine disruptors, to the CMR substances, to make sure that we don't just ban, for example, BPA, but also take then the whole group of bisphenols at once, because, of course, if bisphenol A is an endocrine disruptor, then it's very likely that a similar structured chemical will also be an endocrine disruptor. Then the idea is also to support, as it was said in the previous slide, to support the use of safe and sustainable alternatives. This means that the Commission needs to define rules for what is safe and sustainable in the first place, and not just have the industry put something on the market and then claim it's safe and sustainable. That will be a challenge for them. And then also for the two final points is to improve the entire infrastructure of how information moves in supply chains between companies, but also from companies to enforcement authorities, such that they have an understanding and evidence of what's on the market, what is migrating from products, and such that they can then take action against products that are not complying with the new legislation. And this is where I will leave it off. As I said, the Commission has been a bit quiet until yesterday, actually. So I think the slides should still work with the QR code, because yesterday the Commission published then the next step in the revision process, which is an open public consultation, where they will be gathering inputs both from stakeholders but also from citizens in terms of these ideas, other ideas, and in terms of how they could change or how they should change the legislation. So therefore, I would encourage you, again, I hope the link works, to scan the link, go to their website, have a look at the questionnaire, reply either as a concerned citizen or as on behalf of your organization, and make sure that when I come back, which hopefully won't be too long, blink, blink, Jane, I get to present a slide where I can actually say this is the paradigm shift we achieved in Europe since I was here last. And with that, I will thank you for your attention.